The first thing that reached me was not the sound, but the weight of it. A heavy, aching presence that slipped through the thin walls of my apartment like a cold draft. I was standing by the window in broad daylight, watching dust float lazily in the sunlight, when I heard it again, soft, broken crying from the apartment next door. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was the kind of crying that someone makes when they believe no one is listening, when the world has already taken too much, and there's no strength left to fight back. That moment, standing in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, changed the direction of my life in ways I could never have imagined. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet power of showing up for someone when it matters most, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Touch. Sometimes, one small act can ripple further than we ever expect. I had moved into that building only 3 months earlier, a narrow concrete structure pressed between a grocery shop and a tailor store. It wasn't the kind of place people dreamed of living in. The paint on the walls peeled like old scars, the stairwell smelled faintly of damp cement, and the windows rattled whenever a bus passed on the main road. But it was affordable, and after losing my job at a printing press and burning through most of my savings, affordable was all that mattered. My days had become painfully quiet. I woke up late, searched for work online, sent applications that rarely got responses, and tried not to think too much about how quickly life had shrunk around me. The woman next door, whose name I would later learn was Anaya, had moved in just a week after me. I had seen her only in passing during daylight hours. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something far away. She dressed simply, often in long cotton shirts and faded jeans, and carried herself with a cautious politeness, as if she didn't want to take up too much space in the world. We exchanged brief nods on the stairwell, nothing more. In buildings like ours, people learned not to ask questions. Everyone was carrying something heavy, and privacy was an unspoken rule. That afternoon, as the crying seeped through the wall again, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was none of my business. People cried for many reasons, and this was not my place to interfere. I turned on the fan, hoping the steady hum would drown out the sound, but it didn't. The crying came in waves, sometimes quiet, sometimes sharp enough to make my chest tighten. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, feeling a familiar conflict rise inside me. Part of me wanted to knock on her door to ask if she was okay. Another part, the louder one shaped by years of disappointment and caution, warned me to stay out of it. I had learned that lesson the hard way. Years ago, when my mother fell ill, neighbors promised help that never came. Friends slowly disappeared when my situation became inconvenient. I learned how easy it was for people to look away. And yet, as I listened to Anaya cry, I realized that the same indifference I resented in others was now asking me to become part of it. The sunlight outside hadn't changed. The world was still moving, but something inside me refused to sit still. The crying stopped suddenly, leaving behind an even heavier silence. That silence was worse. It felt like a door slamming shut. I stood up without fully deciding to do so and walked toward the wall that separated our apartments. My hand hovered in the air, imagining the thin wood of her door, the possible embarrassment, the awkwardness of explaining why I was there. I reminded myself that kindness didn't require perfect words. It only required presence. I didn't knock that day. Fear won. I told myself I would check on her another time. But that evening, as the sun softened and shadows stretched across the room, the crying returned. It was quieter this time, almost exhausted. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall and closed my eyes. I thought of my own lowest days, of how unbearable it felt to be unseen. That was when I realized that doing nothing would stay with me far longer than the discomfort of reaching out. I stepped into the hallway. The building was filled with daylight from the open stairwell, dust dancing in the air. Her door was only a few steps away. I raised my hand and knocked gently. There was no immediate response. I waited, heart pounding, then knocked again. Finally, the door opened, just a crack. Anaya's face appeared, eyes red, cheeks damp, surprise flickering across her features. She didn't speak, and neither did I at first. Words felt too small. I simply stood there, hoping my presence said what my mouth couldn't. After a moment, she opened the door a little wider. The apartment behind her was sparsely furnished, sunlight falling across a small table cluttered with papers and an overturned chair. The air felt heavy, as if grief had soaked into the walls. What followed wasn't a dramatic confession or a sudden release. It was quiet. She stepped aside, allowing me to stand near the doorway. Her crying had embarrassed her. That much was clear, but beneath that was relief. Relief that someone had noticed, that someone had cared enough to knock. I learned, slowly and carefully, that she had lost her husband just months earlier to an unexpected illness. The medical bills had drained her savings. The apartment was temporary, a stopgap while she tried to rebuild a life that no longer resembled the one she had planned. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't pretend to understand her pain. I simply listened, nodding when words failed. The daylight shifted as time passed, but neither of us seemed to notice. For the first time in weeks, I felt useful, not because I fixed anything, but because I stayed. Over the next few days, our brief interactions grew into something steadier. We talked in the mornings when the hallway filled with light, shared tea on the steps outside the building, and spoke about small things: the weather, the noise of the street, the stubbornness of hope. Anaya began to smile occasionally, a fragile expression that appeared and disappeared like a shy guest. I, in turn, felt my own heaviness lighten. Helping her didn't solve my unemployment or erase my worries, but it reminded me that I still had something to give. The real change came when I learned that she was on the verge of losing her job at a local daycare because she had missed several days while caring for her husband during his final illness. The system had little patience for grief. I remembered a community center nearby that was looking for part-time help with printing and flyers. It wasn't much, but it was something. I connected her with the manager, using the few contacts I still had. When she got the position, her gratitude was quiet but profound. It wasn't relief alone, it was dignity returning. In helping Anaya, I unknowingly helped myself. Through the community center, I was offered occasional freelance work. My days gained structure again. Mornings mattered. Sunlight felt warmer. The building that once felt like a temporary shelter began to feel like a place where life still happened. One afternoon, weeks later, I noticed that the crying had stopped completely. Not just from her apartment, but from my own heart as well. Pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled every moment. We were two people who had stumbled into each other's brokenness and found a way to stand a little taller because of it. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please comment below and write just one word that represents what kindness means to you. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs today. As I stand here now, remembering that ordinary day when I first heard her crying, I understand something I didn't back then. Change doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes disguised as a soft knock on a door, in the middle of an unremarkable afternoon, when someone decides not to look away. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that small acts of compassion can quietly transform lives, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to Kindness Touch. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. That day I heard her crying next door. I didn't know it then, but by listening, by choosing kindness over comfort, I gave both of us a second chance, and sometimes that is more than enough.